Harrison Wolfe held the envelope the way men hold things they believe belong to them, loosely, carelessly, as though the weight of it meant nothing, because everything it represented already did. The card inside was ivory, embossed with gold lettering, and the event it announced was being called, in the press releases his communications team had already drafted, the most anticipated technology gala in Toronto's recent history. His name was on the venue. His name was on the award, and the name on the invitation he had just signed. The one he was sending across town to a woman he had not spoken to in 4 years, was written in the same deliberate cursive he had always used when he wanted someone to feel how much they did not matter. He told his assistant it was a gesture of goodwill. He told his business partner it was good optics. He told his new fiancée, Cassandra, that he was simply being the bigger person. What he did not tell anyone was that he had been rehearsing the moment in his mind for months. The way Irene would walk in, the way people would look at her, and then look at him, and understand, without him having to say a single word, exactly how far he had come from the years when she was the one the investors called first. Harrison Wolfe had built something, and he wanted Irene Boateng to see it, from a distance, surrounded by the evidence of everything he had become without her. He set the envelope on his desk and picked up his phone. On the screen was a notification from a financial news outlet. He dismissed it without reading it. Irene Boateng received the invitation on a Tuesday morning, between a call with her board chair and a presentation to the capital markets team at one of the 5 pension funds that had approached her firm in the past 18 months. Her executive assistant, a young man named Pascal, who had worked with her long enough to recognize the particular quality of her silence, set the envelope on her desk without comment and left the room. She looked at it for a long moment. The return address was a venue she recognized, the Meridian Hall on King Street West. She had been there twice before. Once for a fundraiser she had helped organize, years ago, when she was still the kind of person who showed up early to help arrange chairs. Once for a retirement dinner for a woman who had been her mentor, in the years before Irene had stopped needing one. She opened the envelope. The card read, Vantage Point Annual Technology Gala, an evening celebrating Canadian innovation, in recognition of the 2026 Visionary Leadership Award. Harrison Wolfe, founder and CEO, Vantage Point Systems. Below that, in smaller text, her name had been added to the guest list by hand. She set the card down on the desk beside her laptop and looked out the window at the lake. It was early April, and the ice had just gone out, and the water was the flat gray of a city that has not yet decided whether to be cold or warm. She had grown up looking at that water from a very different angle. From the basement apartment in Scarborough, where she and her mother and her younger brother had lived for 6 years, in a building that backed onto a creek that flooded every spring and smelled, for 2 weeks every May, like something the city had forgotten about. She picked up the card again. She turned it over. There was nothing on the back. Pascal knocked and opened the door. The pension fund call is back on. 5 minutes. I'll be right there, Irene said. She put the card in the top drawer of her desk, under a notepad and a charging cable and a photograph of her son at his university graduation, squinting into the sun with the particular expression of a young man who is happy but embarrassed about it. She would deal with this later. She had a company to run. The company was called Tessara. It was 4 years old. It had, at last count, 237 employees, offices in Toronto and Calgary, and a satellite presence in Montreal, and a suite of enterprise software products that had, over the previous fiscal year, generated revenue that placed Tessara firmly in the category of companies that financial journalists described as quietly dominant. Irene did not particularly enjoy being described as quiet, but she had learned, over time, that it was often the people who were not making noise who were doing the most. She had started Tessara the same month her marriage ended. This was not a coincidence, but it was also not, as some journalists had framed it in the early profiles, an act of revenge. It was simply that the marriage ending had given her, for the first time in 7 years, a clear view of what she actually wanted to do. Harrison had never been a cruel man in an obvious way. He was the kind of man who diminished by accumulation. Small dismissals, redirected credit, the particular tone he used when he introduced her at events as my wife, who works in tech, as though the specificity of her expertise were a detail too minor to mention. She had built Vantage Point's early operational infrastructure. She had written the proposals that secured its first 2 enterprise contracts. She had sat across from investors at 7:30 in the morning and made the numbers make sense. And when the company began to get attention, to be written about and celebrated and invited to things, the person in those photographs was Harrison. She had not needed the credit. What she had needed, eventually, was to stop waiting for it. The divorce had been quiet. She had not asked for very much. Her lawyer had thought she was being foolish. Her mother had thought the same. But Irene had understood, even then, that what she was taking out of that marriage was not money. It was clarity. It was the 4 years of knowledge she had accumulated. It was the particular understanding of exactly where the gaps in the market were, and exactly how to fill them. She filed the incorporation papers for Tessara on a rainy Wednesday in October, in a coffee shop on Danforth Avenue, on a laptop that needed a new battery. By the end of the first year, she had 11 clients. By the end of the second, she had been shortlisted for an award she had not applied for. By the end of the third, she had stopped reading about Vantage Point in the trades, not because she was avoiding it, but because she simply no longer had the time. She did not respond to the invitation for 2 weeks. In that time, she attended 3 industry events, closed a partnership with a municipal government in British Columbia, hired 2 senior developers she had been courting for almost a year, and gave a talk at the University of Toronto's Rotman School, in which she said, without particular drama, that the best business decision she had ever made was the one she had made for herself, and not for someone else's idea of what her potential should look like. The students had applauded. A young woman in the front row had cried a little. Irene had pretended not to notice because she remembered being that age and not wanting to be seen. On the last Friday of April, she called Pascal into her office. "The Vantage Point Gala," she said. "Accept the invitation." Pascal looked at her for a moment. He had worked with her long enough to know that questions were sometimes welcome and sometimes not. This was not one of those times. "I'll let them know," he said. "One more thing," Irene said. "Book the full security detail. I have back-to-back meetings that evening, and I'll be coming straight from the Tessara board dinner at the Shangri-La. We'll need the whole team." Pascal wrote this down without expression. "And Pascal," she said, "the dress from the Ottawa event. Have it pressed." Harrison was told 3 days before the gala that Irene Boateng had confirmed her attendance. He was in a pre-event briefing with his communications director, a woman named Petra, who had worked with him for 2 years and had learned to read his face. The way meteorologists read pressure systems, looking for the small changes that announced what was coming. He did not change expression when he heard Irene's name. He took a small sip of the coffee in front of him and nodded once. Slowly, the way men nod when they are trying to look unsurprised by news that surprises them very much. "Good," he said. Later, alone, he smiled. He had imagined this. He had imagined her face in the crowd when his name was called. He had imagined the particular weight of that moment, not triumph, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Confirmation. The sense that the story had arrived at the chapter it was always supposed to reach. What he had not imagined was that the evening would begin to unravel before dessert was served, and that the unraveling would not come from anywhere he had thought to look. The Meridian Hall on the night of the gala was everything Harrison's events team had promised it would be. The light was warm and directional in the way expensive lighting always is, falling on people at angles that made them look like better versions of themselves. The tables were set with white linen and low floral arrangements, white dahlias, which the event planner had described as architectural, and the room was full by 7:15 with the category of people who described themselves as being passionate about the ecosystem. Cassandra stood near the bar in a champagne-colored gown, receiving attention with the practiced ease of a woman who had learned early that the way to seem naturally gracious is to appear only mildly interested in one's own appearance. She was warm, and she was beautiful, and she had been told so many times in the past month that this would be the most important night of Harrison's career, that she had begun to feel the slight pressure of it, the way you feel the pressure of weather before you can actually see the clouds. She had asked Harrison, once, why he had invited his ex-wife. He had said it was about showing the industry how mature the technology community could be about success. She had accepted this explanation because it was the kind of explanation that sounded better the less you thought about it. Irene arrived at 7:42. She did not come in through the main entrance. She came in through the side entrance that connected to the covered arrivals area, which was where the event organizers had directed the more prominent guests to avoid the cluster of industry photographers by the front door. This detail was not something she had planned. It simply happened to be the entrance she was pointed toward. She was wearing the dress from Ottawa, midnight blue, structured, with a neckline that was elegant without being emphatic, and she was accompanied by 4 members of her security team, 2 of whom she had been working with for 3 years and trusted entirely, and 2 of whom were new in the last 6 months and had been recommended by a firm she respected. The first person inside the hall to notice her was not Harrison. It was a man named Jeffrey, not the Jeffrey from any previous room in her life, but a Jeffrey who ran a venture capital portfolio she had seen pitched at a conference in Vancouver, and he looked up from the person he was speaking to and said her name with the particular inflection of a man who is recalibrating what the evening is going to be. "Irene Boateng," he said, "I did not know you were attending tonight." "It seemed like the right event," she said, which was not untrue. The woman beside him was a junior analyst who had not yet learned to conceal her recognition, and she said, almost to herself, "That's the CEO of Tessara." The security team moved with her through the room at a distance that was professional and unobtrusive. They did not draw attention to themselves. They did not need to. The attention came from the room. Harrison saw her from across the space, near the stage, where he had been speaking to the event's lead sponsor. He recognized the midnight blue before he recognized her face. Then he recognized her face. He registered, in order, the dress, the bearing, the 4 people moving at a measured distance around her, and then the quality of attention that was following her through the room. Not manufactured attention. Not the attention of a room that has been told to look. The attention of a room that had looked on its own and was now quietly adjusting its understanding of the evening. His jaw tightened. He made himself smile. He turned back to the sponsor and said something appropriate about the venue, and the sponsor replied, and for 30 seconds, Harrison Wolfe was, in all outward appearances, entirely at ease. Then, his communications director appeared at his elbow. "There's something you need to know," Petra said quietly. He looked at her. She had her phone in her hand, turned so the screen faced him. On it was an article from a national business publication, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. The headline read, "Tessara announces 200M Series C, positions for public markets." Below that, in the stand first, under the leadership of founder and CEO Irene Boateng, the Toronto-based enterprise software firm has secured the largest single funding round in the company's history, from a consortium that includes 3 of the country's major institutional investors. Harrison read the article the way you read something that has the structure of language, but is rearranging itself into something else entirely. His eyes moved across the words, and the words moved back, and what he was left with was not the article, but the numbers in it, and the numbers were not numbers he had anticipated. Tessara, in the 4th quarter of the previous fiscal year, had posted revenue figures that placed it within the same tier as Vantage Point. He handed the phone back to Petra. "When did this publish?" 40 minutes ago, she said. He nodded. He looked across the room. Irene was speaking to Jeffrey now, and a woman in a green dress had joined them. And the woman in the green dress was laughing at something. And Irene was not laughing, but she was smiling. and the smile was the particular smile of a person who is completely at ease in a room that was arranged by someone else. The award presentation is in 40 minutes, Petra said. I know, Harrison said. The dinner proceeded the way dinners like this always do, in courses, with speeches between them, each speech slightly longer than necessary, and each applause slightly shorter than the speaker hoped. Harrison moved through the room with the confidence of a man on home ground. He shook hands. He received congratulations. He made the particular eye contact that powerful men make when they want to communicate, without saying it, that they have noticed you. He did not approach Irene, and Irene did not approach him. They existed in the same room, the way two weather systems exist in the same forecast, present to each other in the way things are present when they are moving towards something, but not yet arrived. At the table nearest the east window, Irene sat between a woman who ran a cybersecurity consultancy she had always respected, and a man who was the incoming dean of an engineering faculty and wanted to talk about industry partnerships. She talked with both of them. She ate the salmon. She drank most of one glass of wine and left the rest. At some point during the main course, the cybersecurity consultant, a tall woman named Odette, who wore her hair very short and had the particular directness of someone who has spent 20 years in a field that does not reward ambiguity, leaned slightly toward Irene and said, in a low voice, I read the announcement tonight. Congratulations. Thank you, Irene said. Does he know? Irene looked at Odette. He knows now, she said. Odette smiled into her wine. The trouble, when it arrived, came from a direction that Harrison had not anticipated, which was the only direction trouble of that kind ever arrives from. It came from the stage. The evening's MC, a broadcaster whom Harrison had specifically requested because he liked the man's manner, was moving through the award presentation with practiced efficiency. There was a tribute video. There was a citation read aloud. There were remarks from two colleagues whose names had been agreed upon in advance. And then, during the question and answer segment that followed, which was meant to be warm and ceremonial and brief, a journalist seated in the media section asked a question about Vantage Point's recent contract renewal with the federal government's Digital Services Office. It was a reasonable question. It was, in fact, a question Harrison's team had prepared an answer for. What they had not prepared for was the follow-up. The journalist, a woman in her 30s, with a recorder on the table in front of her, and the expression of someone who has been waiting patiently all evening for this particular moment, asked, in the same pleasant tone, whether Harrison could speak to the procurement irregularities that had been flagged in a departmental audit, the findings of which had been reported to the relevant oversight body that morning. The room changed temperature. Harrison said that he was not aware of any such audit. The journalist said she had the report summary. Harrison said that these matters were handled at the organizational level and that this was not the appropriate venue for such questions. The journalist said that she had reached out to Vantage Point's communications office on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks and had not received a response. Petra, from the side of the room, began moving toward the stage. Harrison said something about the evening's purpose being celebration and not litigation, and that he was happy to have his team follow up. The journalist said, very quietly, "Of course." She sat down. The MC moved on. The applause, when it came, was polite. Polite in the way applause is polite, when a room full of people are all thinking the same thing, and none of them want to say it first. In the hour that followed, the room did what rooms do when something has shifted. It fragmented into smaller conversations, and those conversations turned toward the thing that had just happened, and each of those smaller conversations arrived, through different routes, at the same general location. The question of what the audit had found, and what it meant, and whether the Visionary Leadership Award was going to seem, in 6 months, like an embarrassment or simply an irony. Harrison moved through these conversations with the discipline of a man who has survived difficult rooms before. He was calm. He was measured. He shook more hands. He stood very straight. But the room had recalibrated, the way rooms do, and the recalibration was irreversible. At the bar, A man in a gray suit was describing the Vantage Point procurement contract to the woman beside him in the low, careful tones of someone who has done enough business with government to understand the specific gravity of departmental audits. Across the room, two people who had arrived together were now having a quiet and intent conversation that had not been on either of their agendas for the evening. Near the exit, a group that had been laughing loudly during dinner was now laughing in a different register, less certain, more watchful. Harrison found Cassandra near the dessert station and stood beside her and said something about the journalist being opportunistic, and Cassandra nodded and said, "Yes, of course," but her eyes had the quality of eyes that are seeing something they had not expected to see in a person they thought they knew. Irene was standing near the tall windows at the east end of the hall when Odette found her again. "Are you staying for the reception?" Odette asked. "A little while," Irene said. Through the glass, the city was doing what cities do at night, holding all its light in, keeping it from the sky. Below the building, Adelaide Street ran east and west, and the streetcar tracks caught the light and gave it back in thin silver lines. "I read your pitch deck," Odette said. "The one you circulated to the Series C investors. I know one of the partners at the lead fund." Irene looked at her, and I thought it was the cleanest articulation of a market position I've seen in 3 years. The part about the mid-market infrastructure gap, I've been saying that for 2 years and nobody listened. "People listen better," Irene said, "when someone else's name is on the number." Odette looked at her steadily. "Is that what tonight was?" Irene was quiet for a moment. The city outside the window held its light. "Tonight was just tonight," she said. "The number was already there." Harrison found her, eventually, because he had decided in advance that he would. It was a decision he had made weeks ago, when he was still confident that the evening would proceed as he had arranged it, and the decision now felt like a suit purchased for weather that had changed. He crossed the room toward her at 9:45, when the crowd had thinned enough that there was no one between them and the windows. Odette, reading the approach the way someone reads a shift in wind, excused herself with a brief smile at Irene and moved toward the bar. Irene watched him come. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to be personal and far enough to be deniable, and he said her name the way he had always said it, with a faint upward inflection on the first syllable, as though it were a question. "Irene Harrison," she said. He looked at her for a moment, at the dress she was wearing, at the stillness she had always had that he had, in the years of their marriage, mistaken for contentment. He looked at the security team standing at their quiet distance, and then back at her face. "Congratulations on the announcement," he said. "Thank you. 200 million is a significant round. It is." He glanced away and then back. The glances away was not confidence. It was the search for something to stand on. "I hope this evening has been," he began. "Harrison," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply clear, in the way things are clear when they have been thought about for a long time and the thinking is finished. "You don't need to do this." He stopped. "I'm glad you're being recognized," she said. "I think you worked for it. I also think you know, and I think you have known for some time, what the foundation of that work actually looked like and whose hands were on it." He opened his mouth. "You don't need to say anything," she said. "I'm not asking for an acknowledgement. I stopped needing one a long time ago." She looked at him steadily. He looked back at her. In the space between them was 4 years of a marriage and 4 years of a divorce, and 7 years of a company that had started in a room they had shared and ended in 2 rooms they had not. "I hope the audit resolves cleanly," she said. "For the company's sake. There are good people there." She turned. The security team moved with her, and she crossed the room the way she had entered it. Without hurry, without drama, with the particular quality of movement that belongs to people who know exactly where they are going. Harrison stood at the east windows for a long moment. Below, he heard the sound of a car pulling away. He looked down and could not see which one it was. The article that ran 2 days later in the Globe and Mail's business section was about the Tessara Series C and the trajectory of the company's growth. It was long and detailed and mentioned, in its 8th paragraph, that Irene Boateng had been among the guests at the Vantage Point Gala earlier that week. The paragraph also noted, without comment, that the Vantage Point procurement audit had been referred to a second body for expanded review. It mentioned Harrison's award. It mentioned the citation. It moved on. The article's largest photograph was of Irene, taken by the event photographer, standing near the east windows in the midnight blue dress, looking out at the city. She was not smiling. She did not need to be. The reporter, in the final paragraph of the piece, had written, "What Boateng has built is not simply a company. It is, in the language of the industry she once helped another person navigate, a proof of concept. For what becomes possible when a person stops building someone else's ceiling and begins building their own floor." On the Friday of that week, Irene sat at her desk in the Tessara offices on King Street East, a different street from the one the gala had been held on, and a better view, she had always thought, and she read the article once through without stopping. Pascal knocked at 9:15. "The Alberta board call is in 10, he said. "I know." She closed the browser tab. On her desk, beside the laptop, was a card that a courier had delivered that morning. It was a simple card, cream-colored, with no embossing. Inside, in handwriting she did not recognize, someone had written, "For what it's worth, thank you. You did good work. We all saw it. There was no name." She did not know who had sent it. She thought she might never know. She set it beside the photograph of her son, squinting into the graduation day sun, embarrassed by his own happiness. And she thought that some things do not need to be traced back to their source to carry weight. "I'll be right there," she told Pascal. She stood up. Outside the window, the lake was April bright now, fully itself, the ice long gone, the water running north and west, and out into something larger than the city could see from where it stood. She had looked at that water her whole life, from the Scarborough basement, from the window of the Queen's streetcar, from offices she had shared and offices she had built. It had always been the same water. She was just now standing at the right distance from it. She picked up her notebook and walked toward the boardroom, and the door closed behind her. And the morning opened ahead, full and clear and entirely hers.